$1 million.
Yep,
A
I knew it was
single
gonna tie
grade
back
point
to that.
lower and the card's value drops to $1.4 million.
That's
But
crazy.
when one company has the ability to create or erase millions of dollars with a single number, there's bound to be corruption. And a recent pattern of major screw-ups has many people suspicious of PSA. They've authenticated cards that were altered to look perfect. Their grading system has been exposed as extremely inconsistent, and they've even admitted to straight up destroying high-value cards during their process. And those are just the mistakes that we can 100% prove. There are countless grading decisions that happen every single day that are losing people.
Is there any way you can like actually be physically in the shop while they grade? Like I'm talking about just the grading itself, and then look, get a contract signed, like get something in writing stating that this was what was graded, physical like verbal confirmation that this agent or rep said this, get their information, and then have in the document, and then say it was sent in good condition. So like you should have those three bases covered at that point. Now it's like, okay, now you don't take responsibility solely off of you, because you never know, there's always some loophole like, oh well, you didn't say read this part, we're not responsible. But it could clearly like give the like have all the attention
Hundreds,
be on
thousands,
the
and in
TSA
extreme
or PSA,
cases,
sorry.
millions of dollars. Which is why when you dig deeper into PSA, the more insane it becomes that a multi-billion-dollar industry revolves around a tiny number on a piece of plastic. Before PSA became synonymous with corporate greed, they were actually providing an extremely consumer-friendly service. PSA, which stands for Professional Sports Authenticator, offered a universal standard to determine how much a card was worth. Think back to elementary school at the lunch table. Your friend has a bag of chips, and you're willing to give up your ding-dong in exchange for it. The chips aren't objectively more valuable than the ding-dong,
Crazy
but if
saying
both of you are
ding-dong
satisfied with
was
the trade, then it really doesn't matter. Sports cards and trading cards used to be the same way. Maybe I wanted your Charizard card and you wanted my Pikachu card. We'd just swap them and be done with it. But eventually, how rare the cards were became a factor to consider in the trade. All of those factors is what PSA considered to determine how much a card was worth, which resulted in people paying big money for cards in all different niches. PSA essentially created the industry standard guide of what matters when buying or selling cards. In a close inspection, a trained PSA grader validates a card's authenticity, ensuring that it is officially licensed merchandise and not a knockoff. They assess any potential damage, such as rips, tears, scuffs, folds, and finally, they give a grade to the card's overall condition on a 1 to 10 scale. And at the end, they carefully encapsulate the card in a protective case to preserve its condition, with a label displaying its name and official PSA grade. Before PSA was rotting the industry from its core, it was actually meant to preserve the integrity of it. But as their power and influence grew, they started moving away from being a humble service for hobbyists and developing into a corporation fully fixated on profits. PSA expanded their company beyond just grading cards. They integrated with eBay to create the PSA Vault, which helps store, list, sell, and ship trading cards for their customers. So if you wanted to sell your recently graded card, you could have them take care of the entire selling process from start to finish with little effort. PSA even offered a buyback service where they would purchase the card directly after grading. And some interpret this as kind of a conflict of interest. You're handing a company your card, they're deciding how much it's worth, and then they're offering to buy it from you themselves. If they plan on reselling the card for a profit, they have every incentive to convince you it's worth a little less than it actually is. It's like when Rick from Pawn Stars calls in one of his buddies to tell you what your rare artifact is worth, and almost every time, it's worth way less than what you thought it was. From there, PSA's parent company, which is confusingly called Collectors, also acquired rival grading services Beckett and SGC, getting them closer to becoming a monopoly. Today, PSA and its sister companies take up 80% of the total market, with PSA accounting for a whopping 72%. And that dominance comes with an immense responsibility. The trading card market is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, and basically every collector on the planet relies on PSA's labels to determine that each card they received was authentic and in perfect condition. And when PSA makes mistakes, they aren't just minor disputes. They have the potential to be catastrophic errors that can bankrupt.
Having debilitating student loan debt can take a toll on someone's life.
There was the threats of, we're going to take money out of your paychecks.
There could even be a lien on the house.
We're up to collector. But before we get into that, we all live busy lives. There are so many things to do, and it never feels like life with me. You choose to insert house and colors. It had slight imperfections, including a black dot on the border, as well as a few small scuffs on his jersey. All things considered, the card was still in great condition, and received a PSA grade 9. 7 months later, another copy of the card was sold, this time a PSA grade 10, for a price of $28,100. The problem is, these were the same exact card. Natural markings on the back of both were identical, meaning that someone had covered up its imperfections and resubmitted it to PSA, got a higher grade, and made tens of thousands of dollars. PSA is supposed to inspect every card closely before giving it a grade. It checks for scratches, scuffs, and imperfections, but it also ensures that the card is both authentic and unaltered. Like when you and I look at a PSA 8, 9, or 10, we just kind of say, yeah, I mean, it looks perfect. But PSA's job is to notice the tiny things that we never would. Maybe someone repainted a tiny white chip on the edge, or they trimmed a fraction of a millimeter off the border, or they managed to fix a crease that used to be there. And even still, you might wonder what the big deal is. I mean, if a card can be restored to pristine condition, then why should it matter if it was original or not? Well, it's because the history of a card is a major factor in its value. To see a card preserved for almost 70 years without a single flaw doesn't just make it worth more money, it's also just objectively cool. And this is not just true for cards, it's really true for about anything that is rare. The flowing hair silver dollar sold for $10 million in 2013. That's because this coin was the first dollar coin issued by the United States federal government in 1794. Somehow, someway, this little coin was preserved for 220 years. If nobody cared about preserving anything that was rare, then we'd all just buy one-to-one bootlegs. Authenticity matters, and PSA was meant to ensure all aspects of a card were authentic, but they messed up too many times to count. A Billy Maloney card from the early 1900s was purchased for $81 before being altered, regraded, and sold for a $900 profit. A 1952 Mickey Mantle card was altered and resold for $14,800. Ironically, a separate Stan Musial card from 1948 had its edges trimmed and sold for a nearly $2,000 profit. By 2019, hundreds of examples of altered cards that PSA had improperly graded had piled up, culminating in a class action lawsuit. The lawsuit went further than accusing PSA of making a few mistakes. It argued that trained graders should have been able to recognize the alteration and alleged that PSA knowingly allowed them to enter the market regardless. The situation became too large for PSA to ignore, and they announced an internal investigation into the matter. Now, to be fair, PSA grades millions of cards every year, and these alterations were done specifically by the seller to deceive trained authenticators into getting a higher grade. It is possible that these specific instances were genuine mistakes, and someone just figured out how to beat the authenticators. But whether PSA approved the cards knowingly or made a genuine mistake, the result for buyers was the same. Altered cards entered the market with legitimate grades that people thought were original and could be sold for far more money than they were worth, which made people start to wonder if that little number in the corner could really be trusted. Sometimes customers are disappointed with the grade their card gets. Maybe they thought it was a perfect 10, but PSA found a small imperfection that bumped it down to a 9. The customer now has two choices. They can accept the result and sell the card, or they can resubmit it to PSA and hope for a better result. Pokemon card collector and YouTuber Pokemon Steven submitted approximately 10,000 cards to be graded by PSA over the past couple of years. A little under 200 of his cards received unsatisfactory gradings. He believed that these cards were actually 10s, so he decided to resubmit them on the off chance that someone had made a mistake, and the results were shocking.
81.
This is net, and something on this computer is something worth paying for.
PSA 10. From the regrade experiment, 189 cards in total, so 108 cards did not make the cut.
81 of the resubmitted cards were bumped up from a PSA 9 to a PSA 10. That's 42%. But he had not changed the card at all. The corners, the art, the surface were all exactly the same as when he submitted them the first time. The only thing that changed was the grade itself. And as discussed prior, the difference between these two grades can mean the difference of hundreds, thousands, and in extreme cases, millions of dollars. What one inspector views as a 9 9, the other may view as a 10, and it's starting to seem like the only difference is how lucky you are when your card is being reviewed. PSA's grading system is supposed to be an objective measurement of the card's condition, but as
everything
more
can be
controversies
tens, too,
pile
so I
up,
do
the
understand
grading
that.
seems subjective. Just goes to show that people are insane for paying such a massive premium for
Yes.
10s. PSA is a huge scam, but
That
resubmitting
also
the
can be
card
true.
could also hurt its value. Another
Mhm.
collector submitted over 100 cards to be regraded, 19 were given higher grades, but 34 of them were actually given a worse grade. But why does this happen? I mean, the rules are clear enough. 4 perfectly sharp corners, full original gloss, no stains or no scratches, with a slight allowance for printing imperfections. The problem is that a human grader still has to decide what counts as perfect. Maybe there's a small mark in the artwork that one grader notices while the other one doesn't. What one grader sees as a printing imperfection, another may view as an unnatural defect that bumps its grade down. So now, submitting to PSA is like gambling, especially when you consider the fees
There we go.
associated with this process. Submitting
Now
to
we're back
PSA
to
for
it.
grading costs $25 per card plus shipping, and they do offer slight discounts for bulk submissions. But think about it, if you get a low grade, your card could be worth less than $25, meaning it costs more to authenticate and grade than it's actually worth. However, if your card is worth more, PSA will charge you insane amounts of money to do the exact same grading as a worthless card. Like Nico, who submitted his rare Mickey Mouse card that was worth $20,000 to PSA, only for them to charge him $1,000 for his perfect 10 grade. Or Scruffy, who was charged $150 for a 10 grade 2021 Pokemon Sword and Shield Evolving Skies, and $600 for a 9 grade 2002 Charizard Reverse Foil. There's also John, who was told by PSA his card was worth $25,000, which is why he needed to pay them $1,000 to authenticate it, but then his card only sold for half the value they claimed it was worth. And no, they didn't give him a $500 discount and say, oops, we messed up. And
Yep.
he still made a great profit, but remember that the grading process for all of these cards is exactly the same, and you don't know what they are going to charge you until after they have already done the service. This has led some collectors to accuse PSA of intentionally having inconsistent grading so people will just keep submitting their cards for additional gradings. This is unlikely considering they've been shown to both overgrade and undergrade cards. Then again, there are stories that make it easy to understand why some collectors still remain skeptical. The most notable example of this is when a collector named Preston submitted 30 separate Pikachu Zekrom GX cards to PSA for grading. He anticipated that most of them would be perfect 10s, but he was shocked to discover that none of them received a perfect grade,
Given this
with the vast
business,
majority
there's
of
no
them
way.
receiving
I'm thinking,
PSA
I just
9s.
care
In spite of his
if it's like a low
disappointment,
grade
Preston opted to
boosted
sell
to
the
a higher
cards
grade.
through
That's where my
PSA's
focus would
buyback
be.
service. However, he kept records of the serial
Like,
numbers
I'm
on his
thinking
cards and
7s,
searched them
8,
later
9, 7, 8,
online
9.
to
That's my
discover
sweet
that
spot.
11
That's
of
what I
them
wanna
had
be
been
at
listed as
in terms
perfect
of
10s.
grading.
Around this time, a PSA 9 of this exact card was going for around $41, while a PSA 10
This company
My meeting
relies
notes went
on
from
people
this
like
to
hoping
this
or like
after I started using granola.
embellishing.
I'm in
that,
meetings
like,
all
oh my
day.
goodness, we
10
need
was
the
nearly
10.
$200, meaning that PSA bought them from him as a 9 and sold them as a 10, and Preston missed out on around $1,500 for all 11 cards. And this highlights the conflict of interest I mentioned before. The only people who can change a grade are PSA themselves, so if they are authenticating and buying and selling cards, they could theoretically change the grade of any card to maximize their personal profits on the sale.
As you can see, this is a legendary collection reverse PSA 10 Mankey that's listed on eBay by PSA themselves. But if this card is a PSA 10, then why does the back look like this? Because how are they listing a card that looks like this as a PSA 10 on eBay through the PSA eBay account?
They need to get sued more. It's all a scam. I hate that PSA is the one that got popular. However, PSA offered a different explanation. Supposedly, someone at PSA had seen Preston's original post on Twitter. They personally believed that the initial grading was too harsh and conducted a secondary manual review, resulting in updated gradings after Preston had already accepted their offer, which is shady. They conveniently realized realize that they messed up only after they already bought the cards from
That's
him
how the
and
business
resold them for a
goes. A lot of
profit. Luckily for
creators now.
Preston, his story got a lot of traction online, and he claims that they privately rectified the situation with him, which I would hope means that they gave him the money he deserves for the cards he unknowingly undersold to them. But that still doesn't feel like a satisfying conclusion, and it still didn't explain why the cards were undergraded in the first place. A fellow collector claimed that cards tend to be undergraded by PSA when they receive bulk quantities of the same card. I guess the logic is that when you look at the same card over and over again, you maybe start to see imperfections that aren't there. Or maybe the same person is just going over all of them and is like, surely they can't all be 10s, so here's a 9. But obviously that would be corrupt and unethical business practices. But most importantly, PSA did not make the situation right with Preston until after he went viral on social media and gave them bad publicity. Was Preston the only person this has ever happened to? Or was he just lucky enough to get attention online and put pressure on PSA to pay him what they owed? But one of the most insane controversies that gained traction online was when PSA admitted they damaged someone's extremely rare card, and many saw this as the final nail in the coffin for their reputation. A man named Brian revealed that his PSA 10 Pokemon card was severely damaged while getting it reholdered by PSA, bumping it all the way down to a grade 6. The card was a sky-splitting Deoxys, an extremely rare card released in limited quantities in 2004 and never printed in English. There were very few copies like this and in his condition, making Brian's card almost impossible to replace. Now, Brian was getting his card reholdered. Basically what this means is he already submitted it before and it got a 10, but he was paying them to crack open the old plastic case and seal the exact same card into a brand new holder. Collectors do this all the time if the slab gets scratched, cracked, or it just looks old.
Boot.dev is a platform for anyone looking to master backend web development, and it's designed to keep you engaged by taking cues from game design. You'll find courses that teach you backend web development using Python and Go.
That's a good site. I might look into
A fresh holder can make an expensive card easier to sell because buyers know the case is brand new and the card had recently been inspected. The problem is that the moment PSA cracks the case open, they're handling one of the rarest cards in the world, and if anything goes wrong, the damage is permanent. PSA acknowledged that they had damaged the card and offered to reimburse Brian the full market value, which they determined to be $20,000. He wasn't happy with this considering that the same card had sold for up to $45,000 around the same time, with others saying it was worth even more. Multiple people have told me that the Deoxys is $60,000 plus, and I personally have an offer over that. PSA fixed this issue. PSA got the $20,000 figure by averaging all of the recent sales of that same card. And this just seemed like a slap in the face because at best they're offering half and at worst a third of what it's actually worth. But the problem is they caused the loss of the card and then gave themselves the authority to decide how much that loss was worth. And rather than accepting their deal, Brian took to the internet. Once again, the community was furious, and this specific situation ramped up to a whole new level once Moist Critical made a video about it.
This is where it gets extremely spicy. That card sold only a couple of weeks ago by PSA. And this is where it gets a little conspiratorial, but I think there's a lot of merit to it. There are people that are speculating that they didn't actually damage his card when reholdering it. The encapsulation process, it's a psyop, it's not real. What they're thinking might have happened is PSA, when reholdering that PSA 10 Deoxys that was submitted, they took it and then sold it themselves, and then instead gave him a 6, saying that it was damaged and now it's down to a 6.
No,
I guess PSA now stands for
crazy.
Pro Scam Artists. Critical brought awareness to this dispute far outside the card collecting community, putting PSA under more pressure than ever before. Brian announced they had come to an agreement that he was satisfied with, indicating that he was compensated for the proper market value of his card. By this point, the pattern becomes a bit too familiar. PSA rejected a complaint point, the collector went public on the internet and then the company changed their mind after the story went viral. There are dozens of other examples of PSA destroying their customers' cards, and you have to wonder if these individuals were ever given proper compensation.
Exactly.
Probably not, because a massive YouTuber didn't make a video about them. And now I'm just genuinely curious if anyone watching has ever had this happen to them. Like, you submitted a card to PSA and you know for a 100% fact that they messed up your card and then sent it back but hoped that you never notice? Comment below if that happened. PSA's grade is supposed to be a symbol of reliability.
I'm gonna be honest, so card collection is something, it's not the biggest interest of mine, but it's high on the list. I am more than likely just gonna have my own specific like holders, but I'm not getting them graded. I'm sorry. Like as much as I want to, like I'll settle with the fact that most of my cards could probably be within the 4 through 8 range, grade 4 through 8, and then see what the market does. Like you can obviously, the store owners could probably tell you they can look for imperfections because they're pretty good at that. You can obviously do your due diligence. I don't need multiple sets of eyes. I'm fine with the 4. If it's like, it looks in where I would say ish condition, 4, 5, 6 are fine. But if I know I got a 6, 7, or 8, I'm not gonna really. So I'm like, oh, it's a perfect card. I'm cool with 8, and then I'll put it on the market, and then I'll be fair. Because again, me, I don't know, profit. I don't really care too much about, but I would like to get the feel of selling a few of these, making money off of it. I don't know. Maybe a collection, primarily for maybe like a future generation to sell off. Maybe that might be fine, but nah, I would probably just collect. Yeah, I think I'm going to collect. There's other ways to make money. I don't think this is it.
And prestige, but these days their reputation isn't much better than a sketchy pawn shop, and yet people are still sending in millions of cards to PSA every single year. But why? Well, the thing is, most collectors don't continue to use PSA because they trust them. They continue because they have no other realistic option. There are other companies that do gradings, but a card with a PSA label can sell for far more than the same card graded by a competitor. Leaving PSA for another authenticator would significantly cut down the overall value of someone's collection. And with the prices for some of these cards, we're talking about millions of dollars in value right down the drain. Boycotting won't work because all collectors would have to do it together. The market has decided that PSA is the gold standard, and it's almost impossible to go against what the market wants. As long as buyers seek out PSA graded cards, sellers will continue to sell them, which means that they will just have to deal with whatever nonsense comes with working with PSA. This is why monopolies are supposed to be illegal. But above all else, PSA is just another example of how any hobby or niche eventually gets hijacked and exploited by corporations. The same thing happened with sneakers. Any regular person who wants to occasionally, maybe once a year or every other year, buy a nice pair of sneakers has to deal with insane price gouging, unavailability of sizes because collectors or resellers pay thousands of dollars just to let a pair collect dust on a shelf. Shoes turned into a status symbol, and now it's trading cards. Actually playing with your Pokemon card could scratch the artwork, and wearing your sneakers could scuff them up, which will devalue them, which is ironic because most people buy nice things because they want to actually use nice things, but the only way to protect the value is to avoid enjoying it for what it is. And unfortunately, no hobby is safe from this. It's only going to get worse. Once people begin to put a price on their favorite pastime, they make way for opportunists to take advantage of the hobby and get rich. PSA isn't just a tragic story of an innocent hobby being corrupted, it is a reminder that nothing you love is safe or sacred anymore. And PSA isn't the only business that's built an empire by telling people what their collectibles are worth. Pawn Stars made a fortune with these same questionable tactics. But check out
Pawn Stars is entertaining episode by episode, but you eventually have to grow out of it. And watching videos like this are really good to enlighten you on how the business works. Small parts of it.